What do you suppose was going on in Egypt about the time of the biblical patriarchs? The earliest period in Egyptian history, the so-called Old Kingdom, was already long gone. The Middle Kingdom was flourishing by 1900 BCE, the patriarchal age. Egypt was a truly great ancient empire, but its origins are shrouded in mystery. Its people were obviously African, of Hamitic extraction, the lineage of the biblical Ham. Its language has a Semitic element, which by itself links the Egyptians with the ancient Hebrews. There was an early dynastic period from about 3000 to 2700 BCE. After that, historians talk about 3 plateaus, 2 valleys, and a long, slow fall. The Old Kingdom extended from around 2700 to 2250 BCE. Then we have a valley, followed by the Middle Kingdom from around 2000 to 1800 BCE. After a second valley, the New Kingdom rises from about 1600 and continues to 1100 BCE. Egypt was, throughout its history, marked by a strong central government and Egyptian presence far beyond its borders, but eventually experienced an 800-year downward slide, being ruled by foreign pharaohs, and in the end being conquered by Persia and Alexander the Great. From the beginning, the Egyptians spun many myths having to do with quarrels among the gods and reflecting early struggles to unify the 2 lands, Lower and Upper Egypt. The first of Egypt's gods was called Atum, who created 2 pairs of gods, Shu, god of the air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. Geb, god of the earth, and Nut, goddess of the sky. These 2 in turn begat Isis, goddess of fertility, and Osiris, king and judge of the dead. From them came Horus, ruler of Egypt, and Seth, who then murdered Osiris. There were no lines separating nature, humans, and the gods. Everything simply is. All are species of the same unchanging substance. The differences were in degree only. So, in ancient Egyptian tombs, the gods were part human, part animal. Since the world was a single reality, there was no dividing line from death. There was no fear of the dead, and Egyptians didn't worship their ancestors. The dead could be addressed and asked to intercede with the gods on behalf of the living. One thing we can say about the Middle Kingdom is that it brought a return of prosperity after a period of silence. Marauders were kept away by the deserts on either side of Egypt's empire. So we find a new era of pyramid building during the Middle Kingdom. In the land of Canaan, there was a resurgence of city life during the 20th and 19th centuries, the period of Amorite absorption. The Amorites became more settled, less nomadic. Do we see reflections of this in the story of the biblical patriarchs? Think about it. Abraham, the nomad, is followed by Isaac, who settles down and tills the soil. But it's also true that the Hebrews were slow to give up their nomadic ways. They didn't build great cities, only a portable tabernacle involving a literary tradition. They carried with them the central idea of a covenant, a contract between the people and the divine. It was really pretty simple. God offers protection in exchange for homage. But do we have any hard evidence of the existence of Hebrews or Israelites at all? We do have two paintings of Egyptian noblemen showing Asiatics called Amu or Apiru entering Egypt to obtain food during a famine. Not uncommon in the land of Canaan. This kind of evidence isn't a slam dunk, but if you want to find history in the biblical text, this is one place to start. According to the biblical narrative, Abraham's descendants entered Egypt during this time, the Middle Kingdom.
The Genesis narrative tells of how Joseph was sold into slavery and brought down to Egypt. During a famine in Canaan, his brothers and their whole clan came down as well, setting up shop in the fabled land of Goshen. Was there a Joseph? Did he even exist? And what do you suppose Joseph would have looked like? All open questions, Watson.
Assuming that there might in fact be some historicity in the story, it's argued that some Hebrews may have gone down to Egypt while others stayed in the land of Canaan. For one thing, it's not clear that all the Hebrews left Egypt. If there had been an exodus, it's argued that all of the Hebrews probably didn't leave, and that some who left probably weren't Hebrews. It's been observed, though, that the ancient histories of Egypt and Israel seem to be intertwined between 1800 and 1550 BCE. The Egyptians consider it an era of national humiliation, one of the valleys between plateaus. During this time, an Asiatic people with some Semitic elements first exacted tribute from the pharaohs and then ruled Egypt directly. They were called Hyksos, and they ruled Upper and Lower Egypt from 1650 to 1550, along with the land we later call Israel or Palestine, and Syria. They introduced the horse to Egypt and strengthened fortifications. Not surprisingly, they aroused great resentment among the Egyptians, who expelled them around 1550 BCE. The new kingdom subsequently arose, extending from 1550 to 1075 BCE. During this time, Egypt sought to extend its influence into what had formerly been the Hyksos Empire. Of course, theories about the Israelites abound, and we have to stress that a theory is just a theory. Still, some speculate that during the first 2 or 3 centuries of the New Kingdom, the Hebrews, who may have remained in Canaan, were brought to Egypt. Around 1469 BCE, Thutmosis III campaigned in the land of Canaan, pushing deeply into Syria and establishing effective colonial rule. History shows that Egypt was all over this region in antiquity. So I like to say, Israel may have left Egypt, but Egypt never left Israel. Remember that. We'll meet up with that little factoid again. We should also share another word about religion. The oldest national gods of Egypt were all aspects of the sun: Re, Horus, Atum, Osiris. But during the centuries when Thebes was the capital, a local god, Ammon, who was linked in worship to Re, the sun god, and who descended into the netherworld at night to be reborn in the morning, became supremely important. But the disk of the sun the shape was called the Aten. A cult to Aten, who was pure of shape and empty of myth, arose in Thebes. Around this time, a new dynasty under Amenhotep assumed power in Thebes. Amenhotep became a devotee of Aten, even changing his name to Akhenaten, meaning it is well with the sun disk. Akhenaten began great religious reforms, including a new capital at Amarna, seeking to eradicate the power of the traditional gods. The cults of Amun-Re and Aten just couldn't get along. Akhenaten broke with the Amun-Re priesthood and went his own way. Aten wasn't given any human form. He was invisible and worshipped out in the open, not in temples. There were no ethical demands made by worshippers, only loving gratitude. Question: were Akhenaten, a rather homely bloke, and his queen Nefertiti, definitely a knockout, the world's first monotheists? Might this form of Egyptian monotheism have influenced the environment of Moses? One book argues that Akhenaten was in fact Moses, that there are Egyptian components in the monotheism preached by Moses, including Egyptian royal ritual and Egyptian religious expression. Even the 10 Commandments are said to betray the direct influence of spell 125 in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But reader beware, there's a lot of pop scholarship out there that doesn't necessarily prove anything. Make sure that your research is up to snuff. But there is one striking feature in the religion of Atenism that seems to be present in spades in later monotheism, namely intolerance. In his zeal for Aten, Akhenaten massacred much of the Amun-Re priesthood. He also neglected Egypt's empire, losing much of it to the Hittites. He died in 1350 BCE and was succeeded for a brief time by his son-in-law, who abandoned Atenism. He was the illustrious Pharaoh Tutankhamun, King Tut. Not surprisingly, the grateful priests of Amun-Re gave him a very fine entombment. Have a look at King Tut's tomb. Around this time, 1290 BCE, the long reign of Pharaoh Ramses II began. He campaigned in Syria and the land of Canaan and concluded a treaty with the Hittites. One prominent theory is that he was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Around this time, an Egyptian of Hebrew descent was born. We call him Moshe, or Moses. His name is actually circumstantial evidence that there might have been Israelites in Egypt. It's a play on words in 2 languages, Hebrew and Egyptian. In Hebrew, the verb masha means draw out, suggesting one drawn from the Nile River, as is the story regarding the infant Moses. But in Egyptian, the word means born of, or is born, as in many Egyptian names, such as Tutmosis.
If the biblical narrative had been compiled many centuries later by Israelites who simply fabricated the stories, how would they know such fine details about the Egyptian language, unless there had really been a Hebrew born in Egypt, Moshe, Moses? What in the end can we as detectives really prove? You be the judge.